Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Brianne, and thank you, Lakota, and thank you, everybody who's joining us this morning. I want to give a special thanks also to my wife, Govinda, who's the filmmaker today, and has the unenviable task of following me around as I move around in the space. But
it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining on this day. I know everybody's had a heck of a week with all this snow, at least the people who are joining us from the Northeast. And I think that there are places just north of here that supposedly got about 45 inches of snow. So that's pretty heavy duty stuff. But thank you to all of you out there who are joining us for this morning. It means a lot. It means a lot to Peters Valley too. And as our online program proceeds through this pandemic, it has been incredibly heartening to know that we have such a big community and such a supportive community of artists and students and instructors and collectors and tradespeople. It's just been really great knowing that we enjoy that support, and it has helped us get through this time. And we have vaccine coming up, so I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be more excited about that. And since I'm so young, I probably won't get it until the end of 2021, but hopefully it'll be before that. Let's see, I've been here at Peters Valley for 20 years. And the space that I'm in right now is the main ceramic studio with the kilns. For those of you who aren't familiar with this place, the kilns are mostly outside or in another building next to us, as is my usual small studio, which I share with Govinda. And that studio doesn't get very good Wi-Fi. We can get it a little bit, but it does click off sometimes, so it's not a good place for Zoom. I was afraid I might lose you. So what I've done for this morning is I've taken up residence in a very special space, very special to my heart. And that space it works as in two different ways. It serves two different groups of people. Number one, it serves the summer assistants who have come through the program. And as many of you out there know this morning, this space has had some really special people in it. Every summer, these assistants come and this is part of what this space is part of where they do their work and so forth while they're helping to assist instructors and students and so forth. So it's kind of, I like to call it a sacred space. And so it's really nice to be in this space for me this morning. And then the other group of people who use it are artists and residents who are here during the winter time. Now, during the pandemic, we haven't had the pleasure of having any artists and residents in the space. So that's been depressing at best. I think that during the summer, it's really nice for me in terms of my work as an artist to be around young, creative, fast-thinking assistants. And in the winter time, it's nice to have these established artists come in and have that kind of dialogue as well. So both groups of people I've missed tremendously. And so that's where I have set up my work this morning. And so what my plan is hopefully you'll be asking some questions in chat because I can get down into the weeds a little bit. And so fire away your questions. Any kind of questions are really welcome. And Lakota and Brianne are going to monitor the questions and shoot them to me. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to start off with some early pieces that I still refer back to in my studio practice. And the first piece you saw there is a butter dish, and that's from I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, something like that. And then next to it is a ewer, what I call a ewer or a tug. I named it after tugboats, which inspired their shape. So the cabin is up in front of the boat and the back of it is unweighted so that when a big tanker is connected to the tugboat, it doesn't sink the back of it. And that was inspired by doing an artist in residency at UMass Dartmouth. And my studio space, I could look out onto the harbor and see these tugboats going by every day. The little mug here in your screen is, I call those Wyoming cups because they're inspired by where I grew up in Wyoming. And the looseness of that cup, I try to make maybe 5 to 10 of these a year, but the looseness of that cup is really inspired by when my son was little. He was making pots in my studio and I snuck in real quietly. He didn't know that I was there. And I stood there and watched him make, and he had the potter's wheel spinning at, 1 rotation per hour, super slow. And his hands were just kind of wandering over the clay. And just like kids will do, just mucking it up. And as I stood and watched him make, all of a sudden, over a period of a few minutes, this cup appeared out of this slow turning, oozy, muddy kind of mess. And he was just in his zone, he was really loving what he was doing, and he was in control of his process and so forth. So I kind of, instead of dismissing that as a pot made by a kid, I really paid attention to it and how he had formed this thing so slowly, because my work up until that point, my wheel's always spinning fairly quickly and so forth. And so I started kind of rethinking the way that I might make a cup that represents the landscape in Wyoming, which is, of course, very geological, and it has lots of red rocks, iron-rich rocks, and beautiful big blue skies, and so forth. So that's how that cup came to be. And one of the things about this cup is that it's pressed into in 3 different places, and those impressions are at 3 different elevations on the cup. So the little dimple here that's pressed in the middle of the cup, that's where I put the handle, so that there's a little bit more room for the hand to hold that. And these cups, almost without fail, I always fire in a wood kiln, because in the wood firing, the surface is drier. I like the dry look next to the glassy, wet looking glaze. And the coloration is much more representative of the rocks near Lander, Wyoming, where I grew up. This cup here is a little bit more recent. It came maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so. But with this piece here, I started to make that shift from bringing my sculptural aesthetics and my sculptural work into my pots. So that was a really important period of time. This wouldn't have been the first piece that I did that with, but this represents it. It's a little glassy for me because this was in the this was fired in the Onigama, but it really got a lot glassier than what I tend to really like. But there are aspects of this cup that I really enjoy. A couple of things about this cup is that there's this blueprint line here, which I used my father's architecture to inspire my sculptural and some of my pots. And so those kind of refer to the tight, clean blueprint line that an architect might use to represent a wall or a floor or whatever. Also, I tend not to sign my work, except that I do incorporate my abbreviations of my name into some of my decoration. So on this series of pots, this very organic or geological thing is a B. So there's the name there in it, and this is the D there. So quite abstract, but the signature is there. My mother's always given me a bad time that I don't sign my pots, but actually I do. I just don't sign it in the usual way. With the butter dish, the B's are here, so they're carved right through the handle and are facing downward. And so that's a B. Now with the butter dishes, I went to school for creative writing, and I concentrated primarily in poetry and short stories, and studied at University of Montana way back when in the early 70s. And so I don't think that I don't divorce myself from storytelling with my work. I tend to try to with my pots or with my sculptures, I try to tell some kind of story. But the important thing about that for the viewer, for me, is that I don't necessarily want or expect the viewer to get that particular story. I feel like if I were to make a piece that a viewer goes, oh yeah, I know that that's what he's talking about, that's the story, then I will have lost something of the mystery, because I didn't abstract it enough. I didn't make enough space or distance between the storytelling and what a viewer is able to conjure in their own imaginations. So with the butter dish, the story behind it is based on trying to make a form that brings to bear both my Norwegian background and my wife Kovinda's Sikh background. So kind of marrying some of the motifs and some of the forms that come out of those two different cultures. Yeah, I'm not really, I don't expect viewers to understand that about that, but what's important is that's where I get started as an artist. The story, the idea, the concept is the most important thing for me to get started from and move from there into some kind of an abstract representation of it, or in the case of pots, a functional representation of that. So while I'm on that, I really think of function as being important to me. I like to make pots that actually work. And because I make sculpture, I get to have both worlds. So I tend not to make pots that don't necessarily work. And in terms of inspiration, going back to inspiration, I like to think about the use of a particular pot to help me get started in thinking about what form it's going to be. So I think that cups that are made for drinking milk out of can be very different in their forms than cups that are made for drinking tequila out of, or drinking water out of, and so forth. So I start with the function in mind, and then I move from there. So we're going to come into the space, and I'm going to stay with the pots for a little bit, and then we can talk about the sculptures. These are pots here. I'm going to turn off the heater. I hope that didn't interrupt your hearing. It'll be off in a minute.
I'm just typing in the chat. We're going to give you a coupon code. I posted the collection of Bruce's work. We were getting some questions, so you can take that link. And then there's a coupon code for 10% off any thing you buy online, or if you come in the store, and it is Meet Artist 10. So I'm putting that in. And Bruce, we do have a question.
Okay, what is that?
Let's see. Sophie Beecher asks, has being in the Delaware Water Gap and at PV for many years influenced your work?
Yes. Yeah, that's such a great question. I do try to respond, Sophie, I do try to respond to where I'm at the particular time that I make the pots. I also try to make pots that come from memories. So a minute ago, I was talking about the memory of my hometown, Wyoming, and responding to that landscape in the initial inspiration from that piece. With a butter dish, I'm coming from a relationship and with somebody, and I'm trying to respond to that. And then with a lot of my pots, I also respond to the flora of the Delaware Water Gap area. So I would say that to a certain degree, the Delaware Water Gap can be probably explained best with this piece here. So where I grew up in Wyoming, there isn't the deciduous, it's not as deciduous. It's much more pine-based forest than it is here. So I'm super inspired by all the great plants that we have here in this area. So I do refer to those kinds of images that I see every day. To the water, there's a little stream that goes by the studio that if you see on this pot here, there's a stamp on it. And so I respond that way with the little stream that goes past the studio. And then with this piece, there's a motif here which comes from different plants near the studio, but then there's also a black widow here. There's also a spider which I hide within the foliage. So I use insects and animals and so forth that we consider to be a little bit dangerous. I like that idea of an explosion being so beautiful, you know, to look at, and we're so drawn to that that terrible beauty, and so I try to work those contradictions, because that's the kind of storytelling that I do also in my writing. I try to mix into the narrative or the plots these terrible beauties that talk about really the full range of living and the full range of human experience. And so that kind of storytelling is really important to me. Now, for the viewer, you know, I put in bombs into my work as well. So this motif right here comes from a bomb, and it's a falling bomb, but it also could be a plant, some kind of flower that's hanging there. And like I was saying earlier, it's not so important to me that the viewers know that right immediately. It might look just like a motif. That spider might look like a flower, but the spider is where I started. And my thinking of that spider as being venomous and so forth. So, and trying to mix that in with the beauty of other flowers around it. This piece here definitely came out of my experience here in the Delaware Water Gap. So this is based off a flower, and I started making this shape maybe 15 to 20 years ago. And it's just gotten more refined as we go, but thinking about the shape of these petals and so forth. The other thing I do with my pots is a lot of them is that I carve into the feet different motifs, and those motifs are most often they're some kind of architectural thing. So I see the top part of the pots as being a place where things can be organic and floral and soft. This one is a GT. It's based off gin and tonic, based off of the acorns. And then the bottom part of the cup, the lower third, is much more architectural. And when I trim it really hard and more geometrically sharp, so that you have this juxtaposing this soft kind of upper part of the pot to the lower part. But in the feet, I'll carve these motifs, and the motifs can be like, in the case of this little motif, it's based on the kiln that it's fired in. So it's originally fired in the Neborigama, but that's just an abstract representation of the onigama or the Neborigama.
Zachary just asked whether you designate time for sculptural work and functional work.
I designate, that's a really good question. I love that.
Written work also.
And what?
Written work. It says, is there a specific
Yeah.
time you tend to focus specifically on sculptural functional written work?
Yeah, no, I keep things really organic in my process. So I just pay real attention to when the spirit moves me, you know, to borrow a cliche. That's exactly how I do it. So if I'm feeling like there's some ideas that I want to get at with a sculpture that I don't feel as though I can get at with the pots, I will then start to make sculpture. And there are also rhythms of the year. Like, for example, in the fall, I'm getting ready for the Christmas sales and shows and so forth. So making functional pots becomes part of a seasonal thing for me. But I tend to follow my heart and my intuition on that as to when to work sculpturally or work with functional pots. Yeah. So if we look at this line of cups here, these are kind of a line, a lineage of referring to pots that I've made at different times over the last. These GTs came out of forms I was making early on in New Zealand. So those come from, say, 1990. 1990 or 91, something like that. This guy here, of course, refers to the Wyoming cups, and this is more of a recent stoneware. These are porcelain, but this is a recent stoneware that I'm starting to play around with motifs that come out of my sculptures. So just little glimpses of a motif. So this one here is based on, just follow me, is based on a viewpoint like this. So coming out of the sculpture, or this. So this line, this vertical wall with this horizontal wall. So it's kind of it becomes kind of a symbol. It looks like a symbol, but my intention, I suppose, is to render it as a symbol of a sculptural practice. But yeah, it's becoming a little bit of a motif, and I'm not sure where that'll go. And then this is the most recent pot that I have here, and this guy here has got some real potential for me. I made 2 of them, and I think that probably, you know, when I'm working with the different materials, because I work a lot with lots of different kinds of clay bodies, I don't focus on any one clay body. The clay body kind of suggests forms.
Anne wants to know if this is for sale.
You know, this one isn't for sale currently, because this one I need as a library piece.
So, Bruce, we just got a slew of questions in.
Okay, fire away.
Okay, so Robin Schwartz, please ask your question again, because I'm not sure exactly what you're asking about, please. But Linda is asking, when you make the base, the foot, are you adding a piece onto the pot or just trimming it sharply in?
No, trimming it sharply. Now, that's an awesome question. That represents my brain having to get past some kind of a rule that I learned early on, and that is to make your pots as thin as possible, number one, and in order to do that, you know, I would make a pot, and if it had a really thick bottom to it, I felt like somehow I wasn't doing it right. And with these GTs and with pots like this, I give myself permission to actually throw that base that thick. So it's super, super thick. And then I trim all of this off, and especially with the GTs. So they're porcelain. This is pretty thin up through here, but at the base, I throw that really thick. I throw that over 1 inch thick, and really compress the bottom while I'm doing that, but I can't compress too hard or I go deeper. So it's kind of a funny dance that I have to do, but I give myself permission now to throw super thick and then trim that away so I can get that really tight, clean geometric architecture of the bottom part of the pot. So I can really get that contrast going between loose and tight, and soft and hard, and so forth. Those are those contradictions I'm talking about. I really try to work with contradictions in the sculpture, in the motifs, like the spiders, working with the floral. I try to process contradiction into my work as much or often as I can. So that's a great question. But that motif, oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Brianne.
No, well, Katie Fee, one of our former assistants, she's got 2 questions.
Katie.
How does the spirit moving you balance with deadlines and scheduled firings?
Not very good, Katie. Not very good.
Their question is,
it can be a train wreck. It can be a total train wreck, and because I do move around a lot, and Katie is in graduate school at Alfred, where I went to, and Alfred really demands really strong, tight deadline and a huge amount of work, and it's horrifying for a schizophrenic artist like myself. I really struggled with that at Alfred. And so it's just a fantastic question coming from Katie. I don't know, and I know just where she's coming from on that, and or at least I think I do. And it really is a struggle for somebody who bounces, especially for somebody who bounces around between materials, different kinds of surfaces, sculptural work, functional work, writing, kiln building, these different things. So, but I have always been that way. And it was a really good experience for me to go to grad school at Alfred, where they, basically, bound and gagged me and whipped me into, really being focused. And I really learned that great things come out of focus, even though I really kicked back against it really hard. And
could you talk about what you mean by schizophrenic?
Schizophrenic is that question that goes back to the young man, I think earlier, who
Zach?
asked, yeah, how do you split up your time between things? Yeah, it's a great question, because I am schizophrenic. So that spirit that moves me is
You're talking aesthetic.
I'm serious. I really have to be careful about how I
could you just clarify that you're talking about schizophrenic aesthetic rather than medical?
Oh, schizophrenic.
I don't want anyone thinking,
yeah,
oh
no,
my
I'm
God.
not schizophrenic. I play. I really think it's important to play, and sometimes play for me renders really great new moves in the work, and sometimes play doesn't at the time. But the trick to playing, and by playing, the reason I'm relating that to the schizophrenia is that means following tributaries that are intuitive, and sometimes those tributaries come back later. I remember them later. And so that kind of gets to Fran's question about this piece, and that is this is a tributary, but it feels like an important one. And one of the reasons this is an important one is that it references my sculpture. It references a pictorial motif. I was thinking of Stoke-on-Trent, the kilns at Stoke-on-Trent, which is a city not too far from where Govinda grew up. And it's stoneware. And I rarely make cups out of stoneware. And not because I don't like the material, I love the material, but I haven't been able to figure out how to get stoneware to do what I want it to do. And I think I've hit on it, because it's tight and it's clean and it's architectural. And I think that this refers to some of these pots you're about to see, some of these bowl forms. So I'm really happy with where that's going. It's a tributary. It came out of play. It came out of thinking about things. So I need to hold on to it so I don't forget, because I will forget. I will forget.
Some
So
lovely
for more questions.
Yep.
Okay, so Steve Ryder wants to know when you're going to fire up the big kiln.
Oh, fantastic. Steve Ryder was one of my dearest friends from university, going all the way back to 1974/75. We met in Missoula, Montana, and we raised a lot of hell, Steve and I. And now he's a respectable guy in Houston, Texas. So I'm thrilled that he has appeared here. So Steve, we fire the Onigama once a year. It's a tradition. And we fire it in August. And the reason we fire it in August is not because it's cooler, but because it gives us time to prepare all the wood which goes into firing it. So the kiln uses 10 to 15 cords of wood. And that's a lot of wood to cut down into 3-inch little slabs that go in there. So we start splitting wood in May, and we're usually ready. In fact, we're always ready by August for that. Yeah.
Pam is asking if you can explain whether and how glaze is used in wood firing.
Yeah.
So a lot of your pieces, right, they're wood fired, but you're also using glaze with them. And then some of them you're not using glaze and you're using natural wood.
Yeah. So so if I use glaze on one of my pieces during a wood firing, and it depends on the how clean I want the pot to be. And by clean, what I mean is whether or not I want the pot to be really covered with ash, interacting with the clay body and the glaze, or if I want it to be less ashy, that would be cleaner. Then it's the positioning of the work in the kiln. So oftentimes people are really kind of negotiating for those front areas of the kiln where you're getting a lot of ash coming off the wood, off the fuel, getting sucked up through the kiln and out the chimney, because there's where you get so much dynamic ash action and glass, which is building up because the ash is melting. And I oftentimes put my work behind that work so that it maintains a certain amount of clarity for the glaze to work, but the clay body still has a sense of the ash. So if you take these little shot cups for tequila, these are wood fired. The outside is just clay body. The inside space for holding the liquid is a glaze or several different glazes. Plus, you can see some running of some of the ash that has melted into the glaze there. So the glaze is protected in this case by the pot. And I will put, like, if this is a pot that's going to go up front, I'll take this pot and put it here, and the wood is burning here, so the ash is traveling this way, and I'll put that pot behind that, so that it still has a sense or a kiss of the process. You can still get a sense of the process that it's gone through, which I really love. I love pots that show process.
Beautiful.
But it also has the clarity that that it wouldn't have had it gone a different direction. Like now on this one here, you notice I started the glaze down here, so I'll actually wax inside the lip, so that's free of glass and or glaze, and then I glaze the interior of that, and then the outside it gets the action. So this is actually a little porcelain piece, little ewer.
Where's the clay from?
And the clay is just a formula. And this one here is you know, I just simply cut it with a sharp knife and then pushed it in. Yeah, it's kind of like taking advantage of something that might be thought of as being a defect and making a motif or a form out of it. It's kind of like, it's a little bit of a breaking a rule, I guess, impulse there to do something like that.
So Bruce, back to the schizophrenic conversation, we have a couple comments and questions. So Cynthia says she loves that you are a self-proclaimed schizophrenic artist. Gives me permission to do whatever I want in every medium. I just call it ADD artistry. And then Rose asks, is your current schizophrenic work very different from your pre-Alfred days?
Yes, it's much more refined. The ideas in it, I think, are more clarified. At least to me, they are. Pre-Alfred, I was doing sculpturally. I was doing these large life scale cartoons, characters, based on my experiences in New York City, which for a Wyoming guy was a new experience for me. And so I was responding to all of that, and I was referencing Oscar Kokoschka's work with his in my cartoons, life scale sculptural cartoons. I was referencing his work to a large degree. David Solly was an artist I was really interested in at that time. So the work has definitely changed quite a bit. And my early months in Alfred, it was really all over the place. I didn't make pots at Alfred. I made only sculpture. I went to grad school wanting to learn the language of sculpture and so forth. So I didn't apply with pots and didn't make pots while I was there. But this little piece here is I'm always keeping my residue from trimming and cutting. So this little piece actually has a part from a sculpture that was discarded after cutting. I keep things in a plastic bag. I have a plastic bag in the space, so I put my discarded carvings and trimmings and stuff into the plastic bag and kind of protect it, keep it from drying. And then once in a while, like in a little piece like this, I'll find a purpose for it, a use for it.
Sashka is asking if you use other materials than stoneware, what are they?
Porcelain. Yep, I use porcelain. I'll use paper. I'll use amalgams between all of those things, but primarily stoneware, porcelain, and earthenware. So you're about to see an earthenware piece. So a lot of my recent sculptural work has actually been in either terracotta, earthenware, or it's been in porcelain. So let's go along these guys.
We'll ask one more question, but then I
Sure.
think all our questions for now, and then you can show us your sculptural pieces.
Sure.
Okay, so Carol wants to know, what tools do you use to organize the kiosk? For example, notebooks, whiteboard, or electronic scheduling tools?
Woohoo, good question. Okay, so here are notebooks. So I keep these little journals. I tend to like this size because they fit my hand. If I look at a large sketch pad, it scares the hell out of me. And I love this kind of size because it goes here, goes in my back pocket. I can take it anywhere. And I just keep drawings, drolages. Drolages are combinations of drawings and collage. And whenever I think of something, that's our Jeep. These are joint studies for bones off of skeletons for the figurative work. Some of my sculpture is figurative. Things like that. This guy. This has lots of different kinds of motifs.
The sound is muffled. I'm not sure what happened.
Oh, I think Kovinda had her finger over the microphone. So we lived in Borneo for a couple of years. So here's some just drawings of things from Borneo. That's a friend on a beach. Yeah, things like that. So, and then tools. Here are tools, and these are kind of my basic. These are my basic tools. That's one of my favorites right there. And this is my definite favorite knife, and that is the knife that I use to carve the feet in the cups. So this knife here is what I use for cutting this little motif of the kiln into the bottoms of the cup. So that's really a special little knife made by Dolan. I really like it because it's super sharp and it's super thin. Works great. But yeah, these are kind of it's good for compressing sculpture and so forth. And of course my bucket of slip I use to build these bowls with is the clay that I'm building with most often. And it's got paper in it, and it has nylon fiber and sodium silicate. So the sodium silicate makes it a little bit more liquid without adding too much water for shrinkage. And so then you don't get as much cracking. But yeah, so kind of typical kinds of sculptural tools. This is the tool that I trim my pots with. That's my favorite trimming pot. So all those pots that you saw there were trimmed with either that guy or this guy. So those tend to be the two types of trimming tools that I use. Yeah. So on January 24th, I'm going to have a solo show at the Hunterdon Museum. So what I've laid out here are some pieces that I've been working on in the past year. And some of these are going to be in the show. And these are made out of a variety of clay bodies that I have used according to where I am at the time that I've made these. So some of these come from California, some of these come from Michigan, some of them come from India, some of them come from where else? Oh, Peters Valley, and also from Japan. So these are different clay bodies that that have some kind of local materials in them, and according to wherever it has been that I was working at the time. And so whenever I travel like that and make work, I tend to try to pick out my favorite piece, put that in my luggage, and bring it home with me. So one or two pieces. And so that's how a lot of these came to be over time. So these are the first, I think these are probably the first reckoning I have been able to do with getting my sculptural forms and motifs into the vessel form, and besides just the cups. And so these represent like a really important shift for me in the past 2 years, but because for forever since graduate school, I've really struggled with how to get the sculpture to talk to the pots and vice versa. And so I finally hit on these. And in my sculptural work, I use a lot of motifs from my father's architecture, and have since graduate school. That's when I started to really use his architecture as a way to invent form for myself. And so these pieces here are all made with clay bodies that are here in the Northeast. And there was a question a few minutes ago about glaze. If we go back to that question, on the interiors of these are glazes that have been added in a second firing. So I would say most of my wood-fired work, I fire at least a couple times because I add glazes after the wood firing. So the wood firing I see is super high temperature, makes it really dense, gets the coloration that I'm after, the surface that I'm after, and then I go back and I glaze to lower and lower temperatures. So sometimes I'll glaze a piece to cone 6 afterwards, like this piece, and other times there'll be a 04 temperature. So this guy here has 2 different temperatures of glaze in it. So this speckling is from the wood ash, and and this glaze here on the right is a cone 6 glaze. This glaze here on the left is a cone 04 glaze. So this piece was fired three different times.
Bruce, Deb wants to know if the elements that are quite thick are hollow.
No. Sometimes they are, but I don't think so with any of this work. This is as it is. So I build with, what I do is I lay out slabs, and I do the slabs different thicknesses. So maybe 6 or 7 different thicknesses.
Oh, your sound cut out, Bruce.
Oh, yeah, and then I mix up the thicknesses of the slab. So in one piece, there might be 6 or 7 different thicknesses of slabs. So the work has to be dried super slow. And like I said, I use with the slip, I use paper and nylon fiber. But because the slabs are different thicknesses, they don't like to hold together very well because you have all those different drying speeds and shrinkage speeds. So they have to be dried very, very slowly. Yeah, but I like the weight. I really love the heaviness of them. They feel like, this work is like architectural, yes, but it's also geologic, and they feel like they look. And there's something really important about that for me. Like, for example, this cup here is fairly heavy. And for me, aesthetically, it looks heavy, so it feels as it is, whereas with this cup here, it's lightweight, because aesthetically, there's something light about it. So I really want the weights of what I make, I want them to really represent how they look aesthetically, and so forth. So That's important to me. I love the weight of these new architectural pieces. This guy here, just really quickly, this one I call Shift, and I named it literally for what I was thinking of at the time. And that is that the floor of the thing is this wide, but then the pot, the vessel, there's a shift happening here. And I really, that was really exciting to actually go, oh, I don't have to come up right from the edges of that floor that I've built. I can actually just start elsewhere on the floor and come up with this vessel elsewhere, you know, on it. So there is something really important in this guy. The entryways into the work are important to me. I like to cut through it, and does that interrupt the function of it? Well, I'm not really sure. You know, you can put fruit in there and so forth, but there's that reference to architecture.
Or you can put your imagination in there.
Yeah, or you can put your imagination in there, Govinda just said.
We've got a question from Mark. He wants to know what type of paper and nylon fiber are you using in the slip?
Yeah, I use toilet paper, literally, because toilet paper breaks down really easy. And so that's important, toilet paper. I don't use so much paper that I can't cut through it with those knives. So I want to be able to cut through the clay to get these really clean, sharp edges. But I also want the benefit of the paper to hold those corners, especially on things like this. So that chunk sticking to here is really important, that it not split open and so forth. So the paper clay really helps with that, but it has to be toilet paper. The nylon fiber is fiber that I just get from a ceramic supply store and is readily available. And it's just little tiny lengths of nylon fiber. And for those of you who don't know about all of that, is that all those materials just burn out during the firing and disappear. But what they do for working is that they hold the piece together until it gets fired, and then they disappear. So it makes it so as a piece is shrinking, it doesn't crack apart. Yeah. So
We've got, Allison H., one of your Art School of the Old Church students, wants to ask, is there an alternate method to fire the sculptures due to the thickness?
Super slow, like really slow during the bisque phase. It's really important that for every inch of thickness that you hold at the dry time around 200 degrees, for every inch of thickness of the thickest part, you hold at least 4 hours. So if I have, for example, this sculpture over here, in some areas it's 3 inches thick, so it was important to hold at 200 degrees for 12 hours, and then again at 230 degrees for 4 hours per inch of thickness. So that this sculpture here, as it was being bisque fired, was held at those two low temperatures for 24 plus hours before then creeping up very, very slowly up until the 400 degree range. Yeah. So I follow that rule pretty closely, and that way I don't get too many explosions. Yeah.
Julia
And
made
so
a joke. She says, so you're the one that had all the toilet paper.
What's that?
Julia made a joke that you're the one that had all the toilet paper. You know what? All the supermarkets.
Stockpile.
Who is Julia?
Julia Zimmerman. She's been joining us. I know in our
Good. Okay.
Say hi.
Hi, Julia. Yeah, so these are
questions on Facebook as well. If you have questions, you can put them in there. We're looking at that. And you also have a comment from, I don't know how to pronounce this, ND, but gotta go sledding, but always grateful to have plugged clay for you and Susan Peterson in the bowels of Lexington Avenue. Thank you, Bruce.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's great.
Just continue on, sorry.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful.
Oh.
I was going to mention Susan today, so yeah, so she got mentioned because I was going to talk about mentors and how important mentors are, or how important they've been for me.
Can you tell
And
us who Susan?
Yeah, Susan was one of my longtime mentors. And this piece right here actually is going to her son. So Tog Peterson, her son, is going to be getting this piece here. He's an architect and a designer and builder out in Missoula, Montana. So it's nice that you brought her up for sure. So these are a little bit different scale now. So these are headed to the 100 and these are stoneware, a mixture of different stonewares. I use a lot of the recycle stuff that comes through the program and turn it into different clay bodies. So these two pieces, what I've done is they have like a suspended floors. So these floors are kind of up above, and what I've done is I've disconnected the floor visually from the rest of the vessel in a way. So it's kind of a move or an idea that's akin to this shift here where there's something unexpected that has happened there. So shifting the pot off of that floor here, I've lifted the floor up and off and have put it up on trusses that go through the piece. And these are going to be fired to cone, will be fired to cone 6 with a soft glaze. So these are using this kind of glaze. And what I really like about it is that this glaze breaks away from the edges, so it does show the process of melt and responding to form that I really like, even though it's super opaque and so forth. It's just a really lovely,
Buttery.
yeah, buttery kind of cover there.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. So this kind of thing here is just an intuitive, taking the knife and cutting it and not going, oh, I'm just going to cut that clean, you know, cutting that and tearing it and letting that just speak for itself. So these guys are going to have the same sort of thing. On here, some of the symbols that I've used in here, skis. Here's a ski and a ski here, ski tips. And then also a little house representing architecture, kind of a very fundamental, basic, simple little house form. Kind of refers to my dad a little bit. And yeah, so a lot of this kind of building is really, I just love to build this way. It's chopping and changing and moving and so forth. And it has really come out of these pieces here, kind of talk back to Alfred and early 90s when I was doing wall installations. So this is, I started off with the idea of a bird and a nest. So in my imagination, I'm thinking of a nest and a bird. And then this was a little study that I did based on seeing the body bags from New York in the trailers early in the pandemic and thinking about the crinkled wrinkles and so forth of those white body bags in the refrigerator trucks and wanting to try to respond some way, but I don't know where that's really going to go. But that was the impetus for playing around with some going back to the wall a little bit. And I think we're getting close to the end.
I don't know if anybody else has questions. Julia says she's never dabbled in ceramics, which is why she has no questions, but she finds it really fascinating. Lorraine will post the link. Hopefully, look, or I can repost it here for the 100 show. Let's see.
Great, that'd be great. Yeah, and one last piece. Here's one that's in process. And this has a suspended floor too. This will have a suspended floor. And I'm using, on the corners of everything, you'll see these different kinds of shapes. And I'm using those as kind of a way to buttress, buttress a joint. So where I might get a crack is down this joint right here, because we have a slab that's over 1 inch thick next to a slab that's just 5/8 inch thick. So that's a natural place for a crack to occur. So that's a good place for me to add one of these buttress joints. So simply to do that is I cut I took my knife somewhere and now I can't. I don't know what I did with my, oh, here it is. So I've drawn that joint, I've drawn that angle onto the piece. And so now I'm just going to cut down into that, and then I'll shape this later, but this is really a good example of how I might start to work. Now I keep that, I don't throw that out, because that could be a really important piece for putting on something like that. But so I just play around with the way that might fit on there. And it's just kind of experimenting with these angles or playing with these angles as I go. I just try to get that as close as I can. And what this is going to do is that it adds to the form, but it also secretly holds the thing together. So now I have a chunk there that is holding this joint here together, but then in itself becomes a different kind of I don't know, a device or a motif for that. So then I might draw on here, and I might then at this point draw an architectural line across here like my dad would his in his buildings, and then come down here. And I use these.
Asking how much grog you use in your architectural pieces.
This has about around 8% grog.
And when you're done the demo, I do have a question from Peter Simon, but we'll come back to it.
Okay. So then I really gunk it up. Now I grew up in this house in Wyoming that's built out of, among other things, built out of concrete block. And so what my dad did is he when they were putting the mortar between the blocks, this is back in the early 60s, he had them really load up the joint with this mortar. And I have been using that for a number of years, letting some of that show. So I'll load it up, I'll clean that off like that. So that's nice and tight and clean. And then I really put a lot on that. I put a lot on that shape there. And then I take and I squeeze that up. And that really reminds me of the house that I grew up in and that my parents still live in Wyoming. The mortar just oozes out of all these 1,000 joints. And so that's kind of referencing that. So I have to be very, very careful with that during the drying process. So when I cover at night, I might put a couple sticks here to protect that from getting damaged. And if it gets a little damaged, then I just cut it off. But if it can stay like that throughout the whole process, I'll be a happy camper. And so these walls are just going to keep getting built up off of this guy, and then I'll put the floor in when I get finished. This guy here, if you shoot straight down, what I did with this is I built it a rectangle, but then I cut into it and shifted those floor joists off a little bit. So just trying to stay as aware of and as fluid as I possibly can to what's happening at the time. That's a really good that I really enjoy.
Okay, so Peter's question is, you talked about Wyoming and your dad's architecture. What are the other artists in any field who inspire you?
Man, that's a good question. I love Gerhard. Kovind and I both share a favorite artist, and that's Gerhard Richter. Definitely musicians really inspire. But as a painter, I'd say Gerhard Richter. I still love David Solly's work. Rebecca Horn, love. And the older I get, the more I really love Donald Judd's work. You know, when my early days in New York, when I was younger, I would look at Donald Judd's work and just didn't get it, you know? And now as I get older, I'm like, oh my God, I love this guy's stuff. John Chamberlain. Ooh, love that guy. Ken Little, who was actually one of my teachers at Montana, who lives out in the West. His recent work is blowing my mind, man. Ken Little. So you all have to look his work up. It's just so fantastic, and it references the West. It references where we're from.
And Karen says she noticed something about Sai Twombly in your notebook.
Yes, and Sai Twombly, I was just about to mention. Sai Twombly has been for a long time one of my favorite artists. I love his intuitive response to everything, to his color, and the way that he deals with space. The way that Sai Twombly deals with space is amazing to me. And it's interesting. A lot of my favorite artists tend to be painters. It's probably because I love Govinda. And I love Govinda. Govinda is my favorite painter, actually.
I love you too.
But Gerhard Richter and Sai Twombly come up pretty close. Yeah. What's really interesting about those three painters, Twombly, Dew, and Gerhard Richter, is that they deal with space. And I think as a sculptor and as a potter, I think, I'm thinking in spatial terms all the time about things. So I love that two-dimensional rendering of space and the capture of it. Mason Bolt, who is a painter who lives nearby, man, his work just like rocks my boat, rocks my world. Oh yeah, Paloma and Walter. But Mason really does some wonderful stuff on space, architectural space. Alistair Gordon, also a local artist, is his I would call them drawings are just like deep space. So yeah, I love those guys.
A lot of people thanked you, but Linda particularly said that you gave her some good ideas for transforming the throne cylinder into new and surprising configurations. So
great.
People got a lot out of your presentation. And if anybody else has questions, now's your chance to put them in the chat. Little after 12, so we will wrap up shortly. If anybody else?
I guess the most important thing to think about going forward with respect to the ceramics program this winter is everybody stay tuned for the dedication of the new Neborigama kiln. We're going to have some special stuff around that, and that will be in January. And I'm going to give you a glimpse of that kiln right now. And I think you'll enjoy that. But during that dedication ceremony, you'll be able to see it much more up close and personal. So come on.
Mr. Ellen, yes, he did just finish it. So the kiln is done. And you are all the first to get the glimpse of it. So lucky you for staying on here.
Shall I go in?
No, you don't have to.
It's a sneak peek.
That's a sneak peek.
Right now, yeah.
We can actually see it in the.
So thanks everybody for joining.
We do have one more question from Julia. You clearly love architecture. Why didn't you become an architect?
Good question. I think it's probably because, going back to a couple questions I got earlier is I think architects, I think that I love working with my hands too much. I love the physicality of ceramics. Almost pretty much in every phase of dealing with ceramics, there's a physicality part of it. And with architecture, it's not necessarily that way. With architecture, it's I saw my dad go to the office every day, and I spent a lot of time at the office growing up, and being around his firm, and those guys sitting at desks, man, I have to, my hat's off to them, because I don't know if I could do that. I think it's that simple. It was because the idea of drawing something and seeing it come to life as an architect has to be one of the most awesome experiences that we can have. But there's a certain amount of being stuck at a desk all day long that I think was not going to be my thing. Yeah. And it was great because neither of my parents ever had this expectations that any of us would follow them in their footsteps on what they did. So they always were really encouraging and about what we wanted to do and so forth. So there was never any pressure from my dad to any of us kids.
Because this is the end. We're at the
Be an architect.
I was muted.
I can't get it to mute.
That's
Okay.
all right. Well, on that note, thank you all for joining us so much. Or whatever, I don't even know what I'm saying, but we have enjoyed this series, and we really hope to maybe bring some more of these in the new year. So stay tuned, and thank you so much, Bruce, for letting us into your world today. I even learned lots of new things, and I've known Bruce, I don't know how many years I've worked here, but the whole time. So I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season, and we hope to connect with you in 2021. So be well, everyone.
Yeah. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks so
much.
much.
It was wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, guys.
Holidays.
Love
Happy
you.
holidays.